Here is the message of HaKadosh, the true one, the one who has the key of David, who if he opens something, no one can shut it. And if he closes something, no one else can open it. I know what you are doing. Look, I have put in front of you an open door, and no one can shut it. I know that you have but little power, yet you have obeyed my message and have not disowned me. Here, I will give you some from the synagogue of the adversary, those who call themselves Jews but aren't. On the contrary, they are lying. See, I will cause them to come and prostrate themselves at your feet, and they will know that I have loved you. Because you did obey my message about persevering, I will keep you from the time of trial coming upon the whole world to put the people living on earth to the test. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take away your crown. Greetings to all of the saints tonight. I want to explain some very important things to everyone who believes in the God of the Bible and upholds His laws and His Word. I want to explain to you that I am a Messianic Jew, so I use the Hebrew names of God. I call him Yahweh, and I call his son, my Messiah, Yeshua. If those names are unfamiliar to you, please don't be offended by them. Realize that I worship the one and only God of the Bible, and I am saved through Yeshua Messiah, the Son of God, that you read about in the New Testament. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that we are on common ground. And the things that I'm talking about tonight are equally important to everyone who is from really any stream of what is often called the Judeo-Christian tradition. All of us, I think, have been quite stunned recently by what has happened in the United States of America. We have seen the Supreme Court of the United States find that same-sex marriage is constitutional. This raises many important questions for us. And I believe many of us are very uncertain about what is ahead and what we need to do now. I have important information that pertains to that. What I hope to show you tonight is that something very similar, something very akin to the scheme of Balaam, which you will find in your Bible in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 26, is actually being launched against us right now. And this is an act of war against all of us who would uphold the law of God over the law of men. Now, let's look into the facts of the things that have happened. We'll begin with a video.
An historic ruling by the nation's highest court. President Obama described it as justice arriving like a thunderbolt. The 5-4 decision making same-sex marriage legal everywhere, and supporters were dancing in the streets as one dissenting Supreme Court justice warned of a court that is now a threat to American democracy. In a sweeping 5-4 opinion authored by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court declared same-sex marriage the law of the land, finding a fundamental constitutional right for same-sex couples to marry in all 50 states.
It's my hope that the term gay marriage will soon be a thing of the past, that from this day forward, it will simply be marriage.
Justice Kennedy wrote, quote, "Under the Constitution, same-sex couples seek in marriage the same legal treatment as opposite-sex couples, and it would disparage their choices and diminish their personhood to deny them this right."
This ruling will strengthen all of our communities by offering to all loving same-sex couples the dignity of marriage across this great land.
All 4 dissenting justices authored their own opinions, including Chief Justice John Roberts. Quote, "The majority's decision is an act of will, not legal judgment. The right it announces has no basis in the Constitution or this court's precedent," adding, "Just who do we think we are?" As a senator, Democrat Hillary Clinton defended the traditional definition of marriage, but today the 26th contender lauded the landmark victory and praised the LGBT community for changing hearts on the issue. The 2016 GOP field roundly denounced the ruling and voiced concerns about protections for those with religious objections to same-sex marriage, despite Justice Kennedy's emphasis on First Amendment protections for, quote, "religious organizations and persons." In his dissent, Justice Samuel Alito suggested today's ruling leaves traditional marriage supporters in a tenuous position. Quote, "I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes. But if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools."
It's these comments by Justice Alito that I think many of us find so concerning. I've not met any Bible-believing people that hate gay people. And I haven't seen any kind of crimes on the part of Bible-believing people against gay people. And yet, Justice Alito warns that this new law providing gay marriage across the United States is going to result in something called the old beliefs. You know, for a long time, we thought that the Judeo-Christian religion was the prevailing mindset in America. However, now those beliefs in the Bible are termed the old beliefs. They're passé now. Something new has come along. And Justice Alito also said that the people who hold to those old beliefs will be labeled as bigots. And that because of that, they will be treated as bigots by the government, employers, schools, and I might add, by the public at large. How could such a big change come about in America? How is it possible that we would have rights of religion, freedom of speech, guaranteed to us under the Constitution for well over 200 years, and yet now when we exercise exactly those same rights, we are in danger of horrible discrimination? And just how far is all of this going to go? I have some information that I think will help us to sort through what's really going on and get down to the bottom of it, to see it clearly and to know what is happening. Now, I'm not a person that believes in sound bites. I'm a person that believes that you need to hear the whole picture. So please stick with me all the way through so that you'll really understand this. Justice John Roberts, in a dissenting opinion, said that this new decision was actually not constitutional, that it has no basis in the Constitution or even in the precedents of the Supreme Court. Now, that is an amazing statement from the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Surely he would know what is constitutional and what isn't. Now, as you look through YouTube and other sources, what you will find is that all of the 4 judges that gave very dire warnings about this are being vilified. And you'll find this everywhere. And they are being minimized. But let me tell you that I'm not a young person, and I've been following what is going on in this country for some time. And I have never seen a Supreme Court decision where nearly half of the court gave such ringing, sounding warnings about this decision. And we would do well to look at what Chief Justice Roberts is saying here and to examine whether or not this is true. Is this new ruling truly based in the Constitution or not? Now, clearly, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and really, I'm talking about spiritual matters, not the constitutional matters. However, there are certain basic things about the Constitution that bear upon those spiritual matters I want to talk about. So I want to share that information with you. Here is a portion of the transcript of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence laid out for Britain the basis on which the colonies were seceding from Britain and becoming a nation of their own. Reasonably, when they formed their government and wrote the Constitution, signed the Constitution, they did it upon this basis that they established in their Declaration of Independence. It's interesting to me as I look at this that the way things worked out, I was uncovering this information on that very day, July 4th. Today, as I speak to you, it's July 5th. In the Constitution, it tells us that the rights that we have proceed from the law of nature and of nature's God. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. That is the basis on which we could secede from Britain and become a nation of our own. And then the Declaration says these timeless words: we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This declaration made it very clear that the ground upon which this country was to be founded and the laws of this country were to be founded were upon God-given rights. And these, it says, proceed from the laws of nature and of nature's God. Where do we find the laws of nature's God? Do we not find those in the Scriptures as well as written into the natural order? It tells us here that all men are created equal. The reason that we are equal is because God made us that way. This originates from the book of Genesis, where it says that we are all created in the image of God. This is the biblical basis for the fact that we are equal as to the rights that are given to us by the law of God. These rights, therefore, are unalienable rights. And that word unalienable means unable to be taken away from or even given away by the possessor. This is what we would expect of such rights, because the law of God declares that He does not change. And so, therefore, the rights that He extends to us do not change. Here we have another kind of right. Now, you might have been under the misconception that human rights are the same as constitutional rights, or, in other words, God-given rights. If you thought that, you really were mistaken. Wikipedia describes here what human rights actually are. Human rights are moral principles or norms that describe certain standards of behavior and are regularly protected as legal rights in municipal and international law. And it says they are commonly understood as inalienable fundamental rights. That's a common understanding about these rights, a consensus, if you will. Well, it mentions that these rights derive from morals and norms. Here is morality and norms so that we can see what these things are. Morality is the differentiation of intentions, decisions, and actions between those that are good or right and those that are bad or wrong. Well, I would ask, in whose opinion? Because there's lots of different opinions as to what is right and wrong. It goes on, morality can be a body of standards or principles derived from a code of conduct, from a particular philosophy, religion, or culture, or it can derive from a standard that a person believes should be universal. it seems kind of like sandy ground to me. If that's true, then norms are even more so. Norms are described as mental representations of appropriate behavior. One way of expressing that is mind control, mass hypnosis. In other words, if the people can be convinced that something is right, if they can be convinced what is good, what is bad, then that becomes the norm. Then that can become the basis for human rights. Here we see something about the history of human rights. Where do they come from? What we see from the Wikipedia article on this is that human rights, they say, come from humanism. And humanism is defined as a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings. Human rights, human beings, makes sense, right? It goes on to say, a non-theistic life stance centered on human agency. What is non-theistic? That means without God, doesn't it? Leaving God out. Centered on human agency. If you leave God out and you replace God with man, what have you just done? Think about it. It includes looking to science rather than to God. According to the Humanist Manifestos, both 1 and 2, humanism is a philosophical, religious, and moral point of view. Yes, humanism is not only a philosophy, it is not only a moral point of view, but it is in fact the religion of man. This is according to the humanists themselves. Why is this relevant? This is relevant because some time ago, in fact, in 1948, member governments of the United Nations entered into something that is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says here, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a declaration adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on 10 December 1948, the first global expression of rights to which all human beings are inherently entitled. So this was held to be a global declaration of human rights for all mankind. We're also told in 1976, after the covenants had been ratified by a sufficient number of individual nations, the bill took on the force of international law. So this is not just a philosophical discussion we're having here. Human rights, under this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are international law and are therefore binding upon signatories, nations. It's interesting that the American Humanist Association talks about this. And they say, inspired by our very own Humanist Manifesto, religious belief is mentioned only in reference to freedom of conscience and expression, nowhere in the document is there mention of a supernatural source for the wisdom it contains. Well, here we have two kinds of rights. Under our Constitution, we have rights that are said to derive from the eternal laws of nature and nature's God. These are God-given rights. And according to this view, the object of government is to secure the unalienable rights that have been, in fact, given to us by God. Such rights are not subject to vote. They are not subject to human consensus. They are not subject to human change because they come from a source that is above mankind. They come from the Creator. So the best that governments can do is to secure those God-given rights. To take that stance, I would suggest, is submitting to the lordship of the Creator. Well, compare that now to human rights as we find in the UN. These rights are derived from a consensus among nations that has been embodied in international law. The object of government in the case of these rights is to uphold a consensus of international opinion of rights embodied in the international law. These may be called inalienable, but in fact they cannot be inalienable. Because as we've seen, they derive from changing morals and norms. So therefore, they're not based on something eternal and solid like God-given rights. These human rights laws were set forth to replace God's law with man's law. Why has this not been a problem before now? Because human rights that have been defended have overlapped with God-given rights. And this has been true for a very long time. So nobody really saw that there was a difference between these two kinds of rights. Well, this brings us to a much closer date. This is in 2011. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, delivered a historic LGBT speech in Geneva. Some of the things that she said here is, this weekend, we will celebrate Human Rights Day, the anniversary of one of the great accomplishments of the last century. What she's talking about is the adoption of human rights in the UN. She also says in the 63 years since the Declaration was adopted, many nations have made great progress in making human rights a human reality. To the extent that those rights agree with God-given rights, I'm sure we would all be very happy with that. We want to see people be free. We want to see people have their God-given rights and exercise their God-given rights, whether that's us or other people. We want all people to have their God-given rights. So we're very happy that these rights have been extended to many more people. However, that doesn't mean the difference between God-given rights and human rights has gone away. It doesn't mean that God-given rights and human rights are always the same. Here, we have more from Hillary's speech. She says, I want to talk about the work we've left to do to protect one group of people whose human rights are still denied. They are arrested, beaten, terrorized, even executed. Many are treated with contempt and violence by their fellow citizens. Denied opportunities to work and learn, driven from their homes and countries, and forced to suppress or deny who they are. She says, I'm talking about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, human beings born free and bestowed equality and dignity, who have a right to claim that, which is now one of the remaining human rights challenges of our time. Many LGBT Americans have endured violence and harassment in their own lives. And for some, including many young people, bullying and exclusion are daily experiences. So we, like all nations, have more work to do to protect human rights at home. Now, since all people under the Constitution are entitled to God-given rights, none of us who are of the biblical tradition, if you will, would want to deny citizens of the country of their God-given rights. However, issues do arise, don't they, when we compare human rights to God-given rights? Because I'm sure we all know and can produce from the Scriptures that the Scriptures give no right to people to conduct themselves in this way. Now, simply making that statement, which can be backed up by many Scriptures, does not mean that I hate gay people. It simply means that I know what the Scriptures say. Well, Hillary Clinton understood that this would be a problem for people who are Bible believers. She says, now raising this issue, I know is sensitive for many people, and that the obstacles standing in the way of protecting the human rights of LGBT people rest on deeply held personal, political, cultural, and religious beliefs. That's acknowledging something, that people do have these beliefs, including Bible-based beliefs. But then she says, some have suggested that gay rights and human rights are separate and distinct, but in fact, they are one and the same. So here she is laying out the position that gay rights and human rights are one and the same. And finally, she says, being LGBT does not make you less human. And that is why gay rights are human rights and human rights are gay rights. Well, certainly, anyone that's human is human. We agree with that. And I suppose the countries of the world who decide what their consensus is as to right and wrong can say that these are human rights, since these rights derive from humanity and not from the Creator. So this brings us to the question, what happens then to the God-given rights that we have under the Constitution, since now we have certain rights that could bring those God-given rights into question? Well, at this speech, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, got into that very question. She said, "The third and perhaps most challenging issue arises when people cite religious or cultural values as a reason to violate or not to protect the human rights of LGBT citizens. No practice or tradition trumps the human rights that belong to all of us. This holds true for inflicting violence on LGBT people. No problem there. I'm sure we're all against that. Criminalizing their status or behavior. Well, people choose for themselves what they're going to do. Certainly, I'm not going to stop that. Expelling them from their families and communities. That's not up to me. Or tacitly or explicitly accepting their killing. And of course, that is completely unacceptable to anybody who is a Bible-believing person. Well, she goes on to say, rarely are cultural and religious traditions and teachings actually in conflict with the protection of human rights. Indeed, our religion and our culture are sources of compassion and inspiration toward our fellow beings. It is because the human experience is universal, the human rights are universal and cut across all religions and cultures." Well, this is a problem, because what this means is whatever the United Nations and the signatory countries consider to be human rights now are placed on a higher level than God-given rights. So as we look at this, here's what we glean. The most challenging issues here involve religious values. And these are not seen as a right to violate or not protect the human rights of LGBT citizens. So it's not enough that I do not violate the rights of LGBT citizens. Certainly, I am not going to knowingly do any harm to them. I'm not going to hit them. I'm not going to try to kill them. I'm not going to torture them. I'm not going to do any of the other things, violent behavior that it talks about. But is it really my job to protect their human rights? I think there's a problem with that. Because I believe that those of us who believe in God-given rights will not necessarily agree that everything the United Nations sees as the human rights of any group of people agrees with God-given rights. So what do we do where there's a difference? Hillary says we need to stuff it and do what they tell us. Basically, that is what it says. So what does that tell us? Well, we hold the old ideas. That's what it tells us. And those ideas have been replaced. The humanist religion now reigns supreme. Here's some other things that Hillary said, the Secretary of State, in this speech at Geneva. She mentioned, as I read, that rarely are cultural and religious traditions and teachings actually in conflict with the protection of human rights. Indeed, our religion and our culture are sources of compassion and inspiration toward our fellow human beings. What does she mean by our religion? She says our religion is a source of inspiration toward our fellow human beings. Since God-given rights have been rejected in favor of human rights, I would have to take that to mean our religion is the humanist religion. So there's an implied threat here. Basically, what is being said to us is we are enlisting the aid of religion to advance our agenda. All religion is therefore our religion so long as it will bow to our humanist religion as supreme. I think this is pretty much earth-shaking. Well, later, or during that very year, over 80 nations gathered for the Human Rights Council. This is 2011. I don't know what we were looking at on the news during that period. I don't remember what actor we were watching, what kind of nonsense we were looking at. I don't think many of us knew anything about this. But this happened. Over 80 nations support this statement at the Human Rights Council on LGBT rights. Well, U.S. representatives were sent to the Human Rights Council, and they participated in a joint statement on these human rights at the end of that council. This statement was signed by 85 countries, and I quote, "Ending acts of violence and related human rights violations based on sexual orientation and gender identity." Well, I have no problem with ending acts of violence. My Messiah is the Prince of Peace. However, related human rights violations really are a matter of opinion, aren't they? What does that mean? Could, for instance, changing the definition of marriage that has existed for 6,000 years, could that actually be necessary? Put another way, are we to believe that for 6,000 years, as marriage has meant a special relationship between one man, one woman, and God, somehow now has become a violation of the human rights of a class of people that before now nobody even thought to include in this group? That looks to me like a changing morality, a changing norm, where something in the past was not considered wrong, but now it is, at least according to the humanists. Well, it goes on here, it says the U.S. government is firmly committed to supporting the right of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals to lead productive and dignified lives free from fear and violence. So, as we saw with the statement by the Secretary of State of the Obama administration, as we see here, the United States has fully signed on to this view of human rights. Now, this is a problem to me because I'm supposed to be guaranteed God-given rights. The founding fathers told me that the responsibility of the government is to secure my God-given rights. So why is it that the government of the United States has now decided that instead of upholding my God-given rights, they're going to sign on board with these changing human rights? Well, ever since this happened, we've been seeing unusual things in the news. For instance, things like this. Changes that have been playing on the sympathies of the public, really without end. Constantly putting this before the eyes of the public. Now, really, if Bruce Jenner wants to get a sex change operation, it really is no business of mine. I don't need to hear all this information or see all this information. I certainly don't have anything to do with what Bruce Jenner is doing. And yet, the news has wanted to continually stuff that down my throat. Look at this.
It's the 10th of December 1948, and the UN General Assembly adopts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Yet fast forward to 2011, and the UN Human Rights Council expresses grave concern at acts of violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. All over the world, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender, or LGBT people, are still being subjected to discrimination and acts of brutal violence, torture, kidnapping, even murder. In 76 countries, same-sex relationships are criminalized in violation of basic rights. These abuses must end. The tide is turning. Since 1990, almost 40 countries have legalized same-sex relationships. Many more have lawfully banned discrimination against LGBT people. More and more countries now recognize the urgency and are pressing for action at the UN. In the past 4 years, this has led to the first adopted UN resolution on the issue, the first official UN report, and the first formal intergovernmental debate at the UN Human Rights Council. On the 26th of July 2013, the UN launched Free and Equal, a global campaign designed to raise awareness of homophobic and transphobic violence and discrimination, and to help stop millions of LGBT people being abused for being who they are. We must protect the basic human rights of LGBT people. But it doesn't just require changes in laws and policies. It takes changes in people's hearts and minds. Like the struggle against racism, like the struggle for gender equality, the struggle for LGBT equality will only be won if we join together, if we speak out, if we stand in the defense of the rights of others. The time to do this is now. Together we can stop violence and discrimination against LGBT people. Together we can build a world that is free and equal.
I think that video is probably kind of a revelation to a lot of people. there are some interesting things that it talks about. Notice that it links this free and equal campaign with the human rights that I've been talking about. However, out of all of that, there are a couple of things that especially caught my interest. I wonder if most people even saw them as they quickly passed before their eye. What is this? This is from that video. Did you see it? Do you wonder what that is? Why do we have these basic human rights of LGBT people represented in a pyramid, with the top of the pyramid separated from the bottom of the pyramid? Why do we have this other pyramid with 7 stars? Do you think those 7 stars could each represent 10 stars? Maybe that means 70 stars. And how come the crown, which represents a nation, why is that underneath the pyramid? And what are those lines, if not the laws of the nation under servitude to the pyramid? Does that just sound like conspiracy theory? How about this? Here's the back of your dollar bill. Annuit corpus novus ordo seclorum. Announcing conception of a new secular order. Do you see anything in common between these two seals? Do you suppose that these two seals could really be issued from the same people? Do you suppose that these symbols could therefore both be the symbols of a new secular order? So that would be a new humanist order, wouldn't it? A world order. Free and equal. Just imagine that. I'm sure to most all of us, this sounds wonderful. We want every person to be free and equal. But in what sense? And why is this coming up now? How come the founders of the United States, when they wrote the Constitution, found nothing in God's law to secure rights of LGBT people separately in the Constitution? Do you suppose they thought the rights in the Constitution were the rights for all people? And how come the Constitution doesn't even mention marriage? Could it be that they didn't think that was really their business? The business of the government? But it is now. Well, here's something that should really scare you. Here is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. This is what she says. Every nation is obligated by international human rights law to protect all lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT people from torture, discrimination, and violence. Obligated by law. Does this mean that the United States of America, in contravention of the Constitution of this country and in violation of the oath taken by the leaders of this country, has actually made the United Nations the ruler of America? How could they subordinate God-given rights under the Constitution to human rights under the pyramid, under the UN? This is just as bad as it looks, friends. As a matter of fact, around the world, the United States and Britain have been leaders promoting the human rights espoused by the United Nations. We have here a picture of the U.S. Embassy in Vienna flying the LGBT rainbow flag. And they're celebrating the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. Then we have a picture of Secretary of State Clinton and an address that she made in Washington, D.C., and it says, the Obama administration has made promotion of LGBT issues a foreign policy priority. Did you know that? Have you seen that in the news? That the administration of the President of the United States has made LGBT rights a priority in our foreign policy? Rather interesting, isn't it? We have here also a picture of the Chancery of the British Embassy in Paris, also flying the LGBT rainbow flag for Pride Day, June 29th, 2013. So you see, this has been promoted for a while. And it is a global thing that's happening. And more nations are signing on board. Something from the website of the UN Dispatch. This is essentially an online UN newspaper about UN things. And it tells us the Obama administration is, quote, working behind the scenes at the UN, promoting, quote, LGBT rights, unquote. Really, I think we would have to take from this information that the administration has been a prime mover in bringing all this about. And it kind of gives new meaning, doesn't it, to those pyramids, one in the dollar bill and the other at the United Nations. Very much related to one another and working together towards a common goal. But then we've got this. The Supreme Court of the United States. Now, the duty of the Supreme Court of the United States is to judge all things according to the Constitution, which are, of course, as we've seen, meant to uphold God-given rights. However, on June 26th of 3 different years, the U.S. Supreme Court has made 3 landmark rulings in favor of what we would call LGBT rights. In 2003, they ruled that gender-based sodomy laws are unconstitutional. So, something that was a crime in many states in America was simply wiped off the books. The law was simply overturned by the Supreme Court without any kind of process, democratic, republic, or otherwise. No voting, except among the members of the Supreme Court. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. Yes, our legislative body had actually passed a law called the Defense of Marriage Act, which stated that marriage should be defined as the union of a man and a woman. And the Supreme Court ruled that's unconstitutional. Where would they find that in the Constitution? Since the Constitution doesn't even mention marriage, but gives the decision on such things to the states. Nowhere are these things given to the federal government. Then we have June 26, 2015. And that's why we're all talking about this right now, right? The Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage is constitutional. Well, not all the justices agreed. In fact, the ones that didn't agree were whistleblowers. And they warned the country of the great dangers involved in these rulings. But we do notice a very strange thing here, that all of these rulings occurred on June 26th. Is that some kind of a strange foible? Perhaps just a coincidence. Maybe it has to do with this. The United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco 70 years. 70 years earlier, on June 26, 1945. This is when the United Nations Charter put the United Nations into action. There were a number of countries that signed on at that time, including the United States. Wikipedia says, as a charter, it is a constituent treaty. All members are bound by its articles. Furthermore, Article 103 of the Charter states that obligations to the United Nations prevail over all other treaty obligations. Do you know what that means? It means 70 years ago, the United States agreed to give the United Nations sovereignty over our country. And on the 70th anniversary of that decision, the United Nations made this historic case. And all of these cases were on this same date of June 26th. You'll have to decide for yourself what that means, but I don't have any trouble figuring it out. Then we have this. Doesn't look like the Stars and Stripes. The White House was lit to demonstrate our unwavering commitment to progress and equality. Progress as in progress towards a one-world government, perhaps. Equality as an entirely different kind of equality than the equality that's guaranteed by God-given rights. Here in America and around the world, it is a project, in fact, to bring this around the world. How can you have a globalist government otherwise? And a White House official said this: the pride colors reflect the diversity of the LGBT community, and tonight these colors celebrate a new chapter in the history of American civil rights. Certainly is a new chapter. I certainly have to agree with that. To me, I'll tell you, when I look at that, that is an apocalyptic image. So what has happened? It's like the shell game. God-given rights are now out. UN rights are now in. And it's a whole new world. Now, I'll tell you this. This applies to God-given rights across the board. You may think that you have rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and indeed you do have unalienable rights that issue from the Creator. But they're not guaranteed by the Constitution if those who are sworn to uphold the Constitution have decided to go over to another power. In that case, those rights you think you have are now not going to be protected by the government. And it will be you and I who will have our God-given rights violated. It will be you and I who will, in fact, be discriminated against. That's what will happen. Well, things are happening fast, friends. There is a global campaign now to basically tell people of every religious tradition, hey, you've got to get on board with this. Ditch the old religious convictions and get on board. Archbishop Tutu said he would not worship a homophobic God. Interesting that the Archbishop considers himself qualified to judge God. Personally, I don't. He is talking about a religion that's actually defined by human values. A humanist religion, if you will. He's not the first one to think of that. Back on June 26th of 2000, the number comes up again, the United Religions Initiative was founded. And this essentially was founded to bring all religions on board with the United Nations human rights. And they've been working to do that. And I think you would be surprised if you look at their website and you read some of the different religious organizations who are involving themselves with this. Now, they're directly connected with the United Nations. This all came out of a meeting with the United Nations. In fact, they state that on their website back in 1993. They call themselves United Religions. Say United Nations, United Religions, right? If we have United Nations, we have to have United Religions. And it's interesting, although they're willing to use the so-called separation of church and state, as it is now suiting them, the United Nations says no such thing. In fact, I think Hillary said something quite to the opposite, that they intend to use religion in the service of their goals. So here we are, back to Justice Alito. And I think as we look at his comments again, they take on a lot greater meaning to anybody that's paying attention. Old beliefs, bigots, treated as such. What does that mean? It means that just as Balaam and Balak and the leaders of Midian conspired together for a way to overturn the people of God, so the enemies of God have conspired. And they have cooked up a plot that is meant to push all the people from the Judeo-Christian tradition aside, to silence them, to minimize them from having any impact on their New World Order plan. And, in fact, to persecute the saints. The saints being the holy ones of God, those who have separated themselves from the evils of this world to the service of the one and only Creator of this world. They have declared war on the saints. What does that mean? It means this. The fifth seal of Revelation chapter 6 has been opened. The night of June 26th, like a lot of believing people, I felt the weight of the change that was going on. It was like some kind of an evil dark cloud was coming over the horizon, touching everything. I wondered what it meant. I was awake late into the night, not just that night, but several nights, seeking after a word from our Creator, asking the question, what is this all about? His answer came to me very clearly. And this is it. The fifth seal has been opened. Now, this is very serious because it talks about the saints from times past who gave their lives as obedient servants of our Messiah. And they are looking on and they are seeing what is happening. And they cry with a loud voice saying, "How long, O Lord?" Now, friend, if you happen to think the pre-trib rapture is going to come and rapture you away before you will see any of this, well, it's already started and the rapture hasn't happened. How long, O Lord? Isn't that what people say when it seems like something is going on too long? That's the fifth seal. A lot of people right now are looking for this. They're looking for the pre-trib rapture to solve their problem. But friend, it's not going to. You're going to have to decide whether you really are a believer or not. They were told that they should rest until their fellow servants and their brothers, who would also be killed even as they were, should complete their course. Does that sound extreme? Do you think that can't happen in so-called enlightened countries? So-called developed countries? If that's what you think, the Scriptures disagree with you. Because the Scriptures tell us that this will happen in the whole world. And what is the trigger that starts the process by which such persecution will finally occur? Is it not setting aside God-given rights and the rule of our Creator and instead endorsing the rule of man? Making, in effect, man to be God. This is no joke. And let me tell you, there will be efforts to overturn this. There will be a fight over this. But it has been given to these people to go all the way with their plans. And you need to know that now. Anything that resorts to a force of arms will fail against these people. And this is not our way as spiritual people anyway. Victory, in this case, means staying faithful. That's what it means. Regardless of what the enemy does. That's what victory is. It's not changing this world. You know, it never was. I know some of you who are listening to me, you believed that it was your job to change the world, to change the culture. Messiah never said that. He said to be no part of the world. And this is where we're at. And if you are going to get through this, that's who you need to be. Holy, set apart, no part of the evil that this world is doing. Everything is on the line now. Your eternal future is involved. See what this is about. And I would ask you, if you understand what I'm talking about, that you get this word out. Send this video or this link to everybody you know and tell them they need to read it or they need to watch it, whatever the case may be, however they get it, whatever form they get it in. Get this out to the holy ones that they might know what they are truly dealing with. There's no reason to be afraid. That's the last thing I want to tell you about this. I want to encourage you. There is no reason to be afraid. I want to share something with you. The next day after that historic ruling, this article came out. The Star of Bethlehem, the same star that was seen 2,000 years ago announcing the Messiah. After 2,000 years, on June 30th, 2015, was visible in the sky over America. This is a reminder that though mankind may try to lift themselves up above God, they cannot control the stars. Divine law is superior. And though the scriptures say these things must happen, and it has been given to these people to pursue their goals, this is only so the question can be settled for all time as to whether or not man can rule himself or whether he needs to submit to God. So when we look at Messiah's star, among other things, I think it happened just then. It was planned just then to encourage us as we enter upon this course, this new reality, this new situation under the opening of the fifth seal, to know that the promise he has made is true, that he is with us always, even unto the end of the age. Thank you for listening, and please share this message.
Hi, Dawn here. Perhaps you're wondering, who is Eliyahu ben David and the Zion team? This 7 DVD set is our best answer to that question. In this 7 DVD set entitled Zion Dedication, Eliyahu and I lay out a timeline from 2001 forward, telling you our personal story of how the Zion movement started and has persisted and grown throughout many obstacles until now. Compelling personal interviews with members of the Zion family and the Zion team reveal the simple and powerful faith of the people behind this ministry. These 7 DVDs give you over 10 hours of interviews and a presentation on the tetrad moons and the Shemitah years, and explain what these have to do with prophetic biblical timing. Watch this and you'll know us pretty well. If you're longing to see something fresh, authentic, and moving in step with the divine will, then this 7 DVD set is for you. I'd like to invite you to get your personal copy of this 7 DVD set. Simply write to us at Zion, that's TSIYON, 201 West Stasny Lane, A511, Austin, Texas 78745. We look forward to hearing from you.
I will give you some from the synagogue of the adversary, those who call themselves Jews, but aren't. On the contrary, they are lying. See, I will cause them to come and prostrate themselves at your feet, and they will know that I have loved you. Because you did obey my message about persevering, I will keep you from the time of trial coming upon the whole world to put the people living on earth to the test. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take away your crown. Greetings to all of the saints tonight. I want to explain some very important things to everyone who believes in the God of the Bible and upholds His laws and His Word. I want to explain to you that I am a Messianic Jew, so I use the Hebrew names of God. I call Him Yahweh, and I call His Son, my Messiah, Yeshua. If those names are unfamiliar to you, please don't be offended by them. Realize that I worship the one and only God of the Bible, and I am saved through Yeshua Messiah, the Son of God, that you read about in the New Testament. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that we are on common ground. And the things that I'm talking about tonight are equally important to everyone who is from really any stream of what is often called the Judeo-Christian tradition. All of us, I think, have been quite stunned recently by what has happened in the United States of America. We have seen the Supreme Court of the United States find that same-sex marriage is constitutional. This raises many important questions for us, and I believe many of us are very uncertain about what is ahead and what we need to do now. I have important information that pertains to that. What I hope to show you tonight is that something very similar, something very akin to the scheme of Balaam, which you will find in your Bible in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 26, is actually being launched against us right now. And this is an act of war against all of us who would uphold the law of God over the law of men. Now, let's look into the facts of the things that have happened. We'll begin with a video.
An historic ruling by the nation's highest court. President Obama described it as justice arriving like a thunderbolt. The 5-4 decision making same-sex marriage legal everywhere, and supporters were dancing in the streets as one dissenting Supreme Court justice warned of a court that is now a threat to American democracy. In a sweeping 5-4 opinion authored by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court declared same-sex marriage the law of the land, finding a fundamental constitutional right for same-sex couples to marry in all 50 states.
It's my hope that the term gay marriage will soon be a thing of the past, that from this day forward, it will simply be marriage.
Justice Kennedy wrote, quote, "Under the Constitution, same-sex couples seek in marriage the same legal treatment as opposite-sex couples, and it would disparage their choices and diminish their personhood to deny them this right."
This ruling will strengthen all of our communities by offering to all loving same-sex couples the dignity of marriage across this great land.
All 4 dissenting justices authored their own opinions, including Chief Justice John Roberts. Quote, "The majority's decision is an act of will, not legal judgment. The right it announces has no basis in the Constitution or this court's precedent," adding, "Just who do we think we are?" As a senator, Democrat Hillary Clinton defended the traditional definition of marriage, but today the 26th contender lauded the landmark victory and praised the LGBT community for changing hearts on the issue. The 2016 GOP field roundly denounced the ruling and voiced concerns about protections for those with religious objections to same-sex marriage, despite Justice Kennedy's emphasis on First Amendment protections for, quote, "religious organizations and persons." In his dissent, Justice Samuel Alito suggested today's ruling leaves traditional marriage supporters in a tenuous position. Quote, I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes. But if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools.
It's these comments by Justice Alito that I think many of us find so concerning. I've not met any Bible-believing people that hate gay people. And I haven't seen any kind of crimes on the part of Bible-believing people against gay people. And yet, Justice Alito warns that this new law providing gay marriage across the United States is going to result in something called the old beliefs. You know, for a long time, we thought that the Judeo-Christian religion was the prevailing Here is the message of HaKadosh, the true one, the one who has the key of David, who if he opens something, no one can shut it. And if he closes something, no one else can open it. I know what you are doing. Look, I have put in front of you an open door, and no one can shut it. I know that you have but little power, yet you have obeyed my message and have not disowned me.